All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a genuine revolution in how we think about, well, thinking. We're talking about Noam Chomsky's radical idea for how we can actually, scientifically study the human mind.
For pretty much all of human history, the mind has felt like this ghost, right? Some kind of unsolvable mystery, totally separate from our physical bodies. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? Chomsky basically came along and said, hold on, maybe we've been asking the completely wrong questions this whole time.
And that brings us right to the first big myth we need to bust. This one's an oldie but a goodie, coming to us from the philosopher René Descartes. It's the whole idea that your mind and your body are made of two completely different things.
Okay, so here's the really wild part. The mind-body problem, this huge philosophical headache, wasn't solved, it was dissolved. See, Descartes thought the body was a simple machine, like a clockwork, where things had to physically touch to make other things happen. But then, boom, Isaac Newton comes along. He shows that the physical world is filled with these weird, spooky forces, like gravity, that work from a distance. Suddenly, Descartes' whole definition of a physical machine just collapses. The problem wasn't wrong, it just didn't make sense anymore.
So if the old problem is basically gone, what's next? Well, this is the big shift. Chomsky says, let's just stop talking about the mind like it's some kind of ghost. Instead, let's start studying it for what it actually is, the brain. We're just looking at it from a different, more abstract level.
And this really nails the difference. We go from a philosophical question that you could argue about forever, how does a ghost talk to a machine, to a scientific one. It's still super hard, don't get me wrong, but it's an actual project we can work on. The new question is basically, how does the mind's software run on the brain's hardware? This whole approach has a name. It's called mentalism. And it's really just normal science. Think about it like this. Way back in the 19th century, chemists were drawing diagrams of molecules and talking about chemical bonds, right? They did all this long before they could actually see an atom. They figured out the abstract rules first. Mentalism is just saying, hey, let's do that for the mind. Let's figure out the rules, the structures, and then the neuroscientists can come in and find out how the brain actually pulls it off. All right, so this new scientific framework leads us right to Chomsky's home turf, language. And it sets us up to bust our second big myth, which is the idea that pretty much everyone believes, that you learn language from your parents and your environment. Now, Chomsky's take on this is a complete 180 from what you'd expect. He argues that language isn't really something you do or learn. It's something that just happens to you. It's a biological process, like growing an arm. You don't learn to grow an arm, right? It just develops, guided by your genes. Chomsky says language is the exact same thing. Okay, this is where it gets really, really cool. I'm going to show you some proof for this idea that is already inside your own head, even if you don't realize it's there. Just look at this sentence. So as an English speaker, you just know instinctively that him can't be John in this sentence. It's just an ironclad rule. They have to be two different people. Simple, right? But watch this. Let's make one tiny little change to the sentence. And just like that, the rule completely flips on its head. Now, him can be John. Isn't that weird? The phrase John to visit him is identical, but the bigger sentence changes everything. So here it is, the million-dollar question. Who taught you that? Seriously, when did your mom or your third-grade teacher sit you down and explain this super abstract, super complex rule? The answer is, they never did. Nobody did. You just knew it. And that right there is the heart of Chomsky's argument. It's called the poverty of the stimulus. This idea actually goes all the way back to Plato. He asked, how can we possibly know so much when the actual evidence we get from the world is, well, it's pretty limited and confusing? For Chomsky, there's only one answer that makes any sense. The knowledge was already there. The basic blueprint is built into our biology, part of our genes. It just needs a little bit of experience from the world to get activated. So this idea that we're born with all this knowledge leads us right into our third and final myth to bust, and this was a big one. For a huge part of the 20th century, the dominant idea in psychology was that you can only study what you can see and measure, observable behavior. And Chomsky's take on this is just devastating. He's got this famous quote where he says that calling psychology behavioral science is like calling physics the science of meter reading. I mean, think about that.
A physicist doesn't just stare at the needle on a voltmeter. That's just the data. The real science is figuring out the invisible laws and systems that are making the needle move in the first place.
To make this distinction between knowledge and behavior crystal clear, let's try a little thought experiment. So there's this guy. Let's call him Smith. He's a perfect English speaker. But then he gets a disease, like Parkinson's, and it completely takes away his ability to speak or even understand what people are saying. But then he gets a drug, like L-Dopa, and poof, his ability is completely restored. So the question is, when he got better, did he have to learn English all over again from scratch? Of course not. That's absurd. The knowledge, his understanding of English, was there the whole time. It never left. All he lost and then regained was the ability to access it. And that's the proof right there. What's in your head and what you can do are not the same thing.
And that's the fundamental difference. Behaviorism looks at the output, the actions, the stimulus and response. But mentalism, Chomsky's approach, says the real object of study is the internal program itself, the cognitive system that's actually producing all those actions. That's where the science is.
Okay, so let's take a step back. We've busted 3 huge myths. The mind is a ghost, language is something you learn, and behavior as the only thing worth studying. So what new picture of the mind emerges from all this?
Well, we start to see the mind not as this one big, empty slate, but more like a collection of specialized tools. Chomsky calls them mental organs. And the analogy is perfect. You have a heart for pumping blood, a visual system for seeing. He argues you also have a language organ for grammar, probably one for dealing with numbers, another for navigating social situations, and so on.
And each one of these mental organs is basically a little computational system that grows inside you, following its own genetic timeline. This completely reframes what psychology is. It's not some soft science anymore. It becomes a branch of biology. We're just studying the biology of these amazing organs inside our brain.
And you know what? This powerful new way of looking at things finally gives us a really solid answer to Plato's old problem. How do we know so much? Because we don't have to learn it all. Most of it is already there, built right into our biology, just waiting to grow. But here's the twist. This whole revolution, it doesn't answer everything. In fact, it leaves us with an even deeper mystery. We're getting pretty good at understanding the structure of the language machine, its rules and components. But how we actually use it, how we can say something new, creative, and perfectly appropriate whenever we want, that's a total mystery. It's what's sometimes called Descartes' problem. And honestly, we're no closer to solving it now than he was. And maybe that's the next great scientific adventure.